We live in a familiar, established world, but is it as stable as it is commonly believed? After all, even the origin of our human tribe is still the subject of fierce debate. We are assured that the further back into the centuries we look, the more stupid and ignorant a person will be. Already at school, we learn that Europeans have become the most developed race, and in Africa and South America, there were wild tribes of cannibals. But why exactly on these continents are the most ancient and incredible artifacts? When will we finally be allowed to know the answers to very simple questions? Official science calls everything that does not fit into the recognized scheme a fake and a lie. And only thanks to enthusiasts, we still learn something. Germany, Bremen, Museum of Overseas Countries. Here in Bremen, in the storeroom of the Ethnological Museum, there are amazing figurines found during excavations in Colombia. They are made with a piece of gold and look like a primitive image of a bird or an insect. Their age corresponds to the age of other works of the ancient Incas. To date, more than 30 such figures have been found. Only in Bremen, there are 6 of them. But for a long time, they did not attract anyone. Everything changed when professional aircraft designers firm Lockheed became interested in them. Aircraft manufacturers and aerospace designers repeat that these figures represent the aircraft. Peter Belting, a retired Luftwaffe pilot, was the first who decided to test the flight properties of the Golden Inca airplane. Since aircraft designers from Lockheed were interested in its similarity to a high-speed aircraft and, moreover, used the shape of the delta wing of an ancient statuette in the design of the Sister 71 Blackbird aircraft, it means that there is something in it. Moreover, the famous Soviet MiGs, like 2 drops of water similar to an ancient statuette. There are many aerodynamic properties concentrated in this figure, which no bird possesses. Nowhere in ornithology is there, for example, a vertical rudder. There is no separated elevator. Their delta-shaped design indicates that we are talking about something very fast. About a high-speed aircraft capable of flying in the atmosphere. Peter Belting did a very simple and seemingly obvious thing for any researcher. He tried to construct a radio-controlled model airplane Gold and equip it with the engine. The problem is that more on Earth was never found anything that would be so made of similar material. We had an exact copy of the artifact located in the Bogatyr Museum. We were given it for a while because there are very few such copies. When the model was ready, it was shown to scientists. But no one believed that the aircraft, made on the basis of a golden statuette of ancient Indians, would fly. Peter Belting himself doubted this. The plane was too strange in its shape. There was, however, a hope that he would still be able to get off the ground. But to fly freely. Amazingly, the aerodynamics of the strange plane turned out to be just perfect. The aircraft performed the most complex loops and barrels, planned even with the engine turned off. The conclusion was obvious. In ancient times, excellent aircraft designers lived on Earth. It would seem that any scientist should have seized on the results of the experiment and done everything to investigate the phenomenon. But no. Somehow the ancient flying model aircraft proved to be no interest. If there had been another civilization before us, there should have been more evidence of its existence than the junk that some people present as unusual evidence. Junk. Flying an airplane made according to a model that is several thousand years old. Is it junk? Who do they want to deceive with such statements? Why are the most important facts being hidden from us? Who benefits from having a part of our common history remain under an unspoken, but very effective ban? Great Britain, London, Cromwell, Natural History Museum. London's Natural History Museum is most like a temple. A majestic dome, columns, like in Catholic cathedrals, a guide like a preacher. There is also a God here, as it should be, exalted above the crowd. Charles Darwin. His teaching today is the only recognized theory of the origin and development of man as a species. The only religion that can be preached in the modern scientific world. Any other version of human history is immediately declared heresy. For some reason, there is a reluctance to explore this further. It turned out to be classified, and I do not know why. How did this become possible? Did Darwin himself manage to advertise his idea so successfully at one time? No, he did not aim at God, and he never considered his theory of evolution to be a doctrine, much less a dogma. For him, it was just a scientific hypothesis. Charles Darwin developed the theory of evolution, and we see that it has become a problem that has led to the collapse of society. But the scientific process does not stand still and is not dogmatic. However, in this case, why did Charles Darwin's theory of evolution turn into a dogma after all? Why has it become a new religion in which all of us are forced to believe without proof? Why are all other hypotheses rejected that point, for example, to an alien influence on our history? Who needed human civilization to be considered primarily European, and so that the peoples who have lived from time immemorial on the lands rich in oil, gold and diamonds in Africa, Asia and America, turn out to be not children of God, but backward animals, underdeveloped monkeys. Why for the sake of this it was necessary to go to deception and forcible confiscation of evidence. Ecuador, Ushuaia Province, Queco City. The Church of Saint Mary Auxiliadora. The Church of Saint Mary Auxiliadora in Cuenca is called the Church of the Beggars. His parishioners are little interested in the history of human development and Darwin's theory of evolution. Maybe that's why few people know about what is stored down there in the basement of the temple. Be careful. Take your time. Follow me. This is the basement of the Salesian Fathers. Here, where we are, the building materials are stored, and then there is the Padre Crespi collection. More precisely, part of the collection. Padre Crespi has been collecting it all his life. As a child, I often ran here. Padre Crespi's collection consists of rectangular plates made of silver and gold, on which strange drawings are applied by the method of coinage. Scientists determine the age of the finds at 3,500 years. Padre Crespi brought them to Cuenca from the jungle from the Indians, among whom he lived for many years as a missionary. However, the Salesian Fathers were immediately interested in the collection. The plates were ordered to be removed. Unfortunately, by order of the Salesian congregations, they were taken out of the country, but Padre Crespi, in order to preserve these cultural objects in the city, organized the production of copies. They were made by experienced craftsmen under his strict scientific guidance. Unfortunately, copies were not made from all the plates, but even the small part that was saved. Explained the reason for the fright of the Salesian Fathers. The drawings on the plates undermined all ideas about the history of mankind. Especially the boys loved to look at this plate. Here, as you can see, is an image of an Indian with an elephant. It's weird enough. We have here in Ecuador, there never has been elephants. Look here. It's clearly visible here. It seems to me that this is a baby elephant fed by Indians. How does modern science explain this incredible neighborhood? But nothing. And this is especially strange considering that elephants have never been not only in Ecuador, but also on the entire American continent as a whole. Perhaps serious historians and archaeologists simply do not know about this ancient tablet. Among the parishioners of the Church of Beggars in distant Ecuador, there are probably really no doctors of sciences. But after all, the Church of Saint Mary Auxiliadora is far from the only place that keeps riddles of this kind. And in order to see the others, you don't even have to go down to the basement. Peru, the region of Cusco, the city of Ollantaytambo. Gigantic zigzag walls of huge monolithic blocks weighing 100 tons. But they also look like simple bricks compared to this giant from the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, which weighs 300 tons. Who built all this? The Incas. Their descendants, who live in Ollantaytambo today, could be proud of such a past, but honestly doubt that their ancestors were able to build such a thing. It was built before the birth of Christ. These stones are very ancient. It was a pre-Georgian culture. These are our ancestors, but we, Aymara, cocaine appeared here later. In that case, who did it? Indeed, some kind of civilization that originated on Earth before the Incas. It would seem that nothing contradicts this version, but tourists in the Ollantaytambo temple complex persistently talk about the hard-working Indians who built everything here. But what about this? How to explain that the lower tiers of buildings were erected by virtuoso builders from carefully fitted large blocks, and the following layers are somehow composed of natural, almost untreated smaller stones. Then there is the familiar, in fact, modern masonry. Everything is clear with her. This is the work of the Spaniards. But what happened when professionally processed stones were replaced by something primitive? The Incas at some point suddenly forgot how to build. I do not believe that the Incas, for 100 or 200 years of their short history, had anything to do with the giant megalithic buildings that we see everywhere in the vans. I think the following happened. The Incas appeared in these places much later. They found these giant structures that had already been built before them, and simply erected their small stone walls on top of these structures. Is this obvious inconsistency striking only to us? Scientists with the enormous buildings of the want that, all right. But in that case, at what point did this clarity come? Wasn't it when the theory of evolution began its march across the continents of the Earth? After all, it was the social Darwinism created on its basis. That became an excellent justification for several centuries of robberies and murders of the local population in the colonies. Our ancestors, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers told us that everything used to be fine, beautiful. But the Spaniards came and destroyed everything, and people were killed. They talk about it here. They say that they took away a lot, stole. But does the white race have any reason to consider itself the peak of human development? No, and the evidence has been preserved. Not all of them were possible to confiscate and withdraw, like Padres plates to rescue. In Peru, the Cusco region, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, another colossal complex, which is also considered to be the work of the ancient Incas. The same perfectly fitted stones that we have already seen, Ollantaytambo. It seems that it was not worth going here, but it was here that we managed to discover another strange fact, to which official science, for some reason, again turns a blind eye. Take a look. What kind of tool could leave such a trace? Not only the Incas, not only modern archaeologists could not do this. In general, any modern industry is not able to do this. It was as if a huge circular saw had sliced through the stone. And it's not soft gypsum, it's andesite, a local variant of one of the hardest minerals, granite. In one movement, the saw went 10 to 15 centimeters deep into the hard rock of the stones. All the experts say together, here we will take any means of our own. We will not be able to bury ourselves in one movement for such a distance. First of all, the tool will not stand. Secondly, a person will not be able to make such an effort. And even the mechanism cannot make such an effort, leave such traces. The marks on the stones, which were left by ancient tools, are found in cuts, drilled holes, surprisingly smooth sections. Who made them, if even modern technology is not capable of it? The same Incas who only knew soft meat of bronze. The argument in defense of this unconvincing statement, which official science imposes on us, is simple. According to the theory of evolution, there was simply no one to saw something in these places. But why this deception? USA, Los Angeles. Today, some scientists are too zealous in defending Darwin's theory of evolution, which they love very much. But think about it. It's just a matter of unsupported faith. Michael Cremo is an odious figure in the modern scientific world. No serious archaeologist or historian speaks of him with boundless grin, although the facts that he cites in his books at least deserve to be studied. Why doesn't anyone pay attention to them? Why doesn't he try to answer the question of how old humanity really is? And who were those who built the fortress of Sacsayhuaman and taught the Lynx how to calculate their amazingly accurate calendar for the ancient world? Great Britain, London. I think there are forces in the world that want to keep humanity in ignorance. If we are ignorant, then we cannot take any action. If we don't know where we came from, who we are, we can't be correct, appropriate plans for the future. Starting work on this film, we immediately refused to consider seriously the theory of a certain global conspiracy, the participants of which systematically prevent humanity from dealing with its past. But time after time, when faced with the attitude of official science to any alternative version of human history, with a strange corporate silencing of facts, we involuntarily began to wonder if our decision was premature. Peru, Morona Santiago Province, Catao Region, Akwar Indian area. A huge number of stones with ancient petroglyphs inscriptions made in a language unknown to science have been found here. It has nothing to do with the speech of the Akwar Indians inhabiting these places. Another mystery. This petroglyph is about 3,000 years old. Many petrographic elements are found throughout America. But no one studies this phenomenon. Comprehensive studies devoted to deciphering these symbols have not yet been conducted. Who knocked them out on the stones placed all over America? What did their creators, who lived on these lands long before the Incas, thus wanted to convey to posterity? Why do scientists categorically reject the idea that man appeared on our planet earlier than is commonly believed, according to Darwin's theory of evolution? Darwin's theory doesn't explain everything. But if its principle is taken as a basis, then, in fact, as a concept, it is correct. Therefore, I believe that it is impossible to deny Darwin's theory now. At least, so far there are no sufficient reasons to deny it. All museum expositions, which should tell visitors about the origin of species on Earth, are arranged in the same way. First we are shown a dinosaur skeleton, then a stuffed mammoth after that. Skulls of monkeys, Australopithecines and Neanderthals, then representatives of wild tribes of the Third World, and finally, a European, a white man, the peak of civilization development appears before our eyes. By the way, there is not a word about anything like this in Darwin's theory itself. Darwin and his theory of evolution described the situation in this way. Everything went gradually, slowly and naturally. The monkey accidentally took a stick. Then she straightened up a little. Then she knocked down the fruit with this stick. And so it went on and on and on. Then, finally, there was a man walking upright. At the same time, nothing about the evolutionary dominance of the white race. But someone needed to make it so that it was a light-skinned European who became considered the crown of creation. And then, the cruel laws of animal life described by Darwin were transferred to human society. The theory of social Darwinism arose, and then the science of eugenics. By the way, its creator was Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin. The theories of social Darwinism and eugenics have become an excellent justification for the centuries-old cruelty of the European colonizers. They will use this occasion to develop a form of power, a form and methods of elevation above the local social education.
И методы возвышения над местным социальным образованием.
And this power will be increased to phenomenal proportions.
До феноменальных размеров.
Fans of eugenics have become, for example, Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, William Churchill, and Hitler. His racial theory was largely based on the ideas of social Darwinists. As a result, in the German concentration camps, died 12 million people. But these photos were taken a century earlier in British India. During their rule, the British destroyed 30 million people here. Moreover, for example, Lord Lytton, one of the viceroys of India, justified his national policy with nothing other than an interpretation of Darwin's theory. In the struggle for survival, he believed the strongest should win, and therefore the white man. And here we come to completely philosophical theories. Attitude to difference, attitude to the other, to another person. This is something universal among all peoples. This search for difference, for gaining status in a regulated linear society. To ruin the soul of God's creation. Sin. Clear the territory of annoying animals. The ape man. A rational act. But for now, let's leave the formula for the formation and strengthening of Darwinism in the British colonies and move on. We still have a lot of evidence in our hands that the theory of evolution cannot be considered absolutely correct in any way. Bolivia, in Gavia Province, Tiahuanaco. The city of Tiahuanaco in Bolivia is the highest mountain city in the world. The height is 3,800 meters. The main local attraction is the Temple of Colossus Saya, built of huge, beautifully crafted stone blocks. At one time, he shone in the sun so that he blinded his eyes. Copper and bronze plates were fixed on its walls with gold nails, completely covering the masonry. How were the Incas able to deliver these huge blocks from the quarries, which were located many kilometers below? We are all thinking about this, and our children and grandchildren. How could our ancestors have done such a thing? After all, there were no tools, machines before. Everything was done manually. massive stones of which built Colossa in Bolivia, the foundations of buildings in Ollantaytambo, and strength to Sacsayhuaman, Peru, raised to such a height manually, with the help of levers and rolling on stone cylinders, about which official science likes to tell us so much. Up such a slope. Can you imagine something like that? There is one historical report that tells about the Inca attempt to move a huge stone block. This one ended in disaster. They moved it a short distance, it tipped over and rolled down the mountain, killing thousands of people. Why is it so fundamental to assert that it was they who built the huge walls in the temple complexes of the sacred valley of the Incas, and not someone who preceded them, whose interests will be infringed by the fact that there was an older period in the history of earthly civilization? For what reason are those scientists who just honestly do their job, trying to deal with strange findings and facts, declared heretics? USA, Colorado. We spent a lot of effort to find this elderly woman. Virginia Steen McIntyre, the once promising paleogeologist, has been living here, far from the centers of scientific thought, in a small village in the mountains of Colorado for many years. I haven't been paid for my work since 1968. I became an example of how, if you question some fundamental theories, so-called dogmas, you can be out of work. In the early 60s, a group of young archaeologists, among whom was Virginia, near Mexico City, in the town of White Leco, found the parking lot of an ancient man. During the excavations, a large number of tools and household items were found, and a stone with drawings carved on it, among which scientists were amazed to see the image of an elephant. An elephant in Peru on the plates of Padre Crespi, an elephant in Mexico. A strange coincidence, or maybe evidence. The researchers conducted the standard examinations and analyses for any archaeological finds and were even more amazed. The age of the parking lot was determined at 250,000 years. While official science believes that man appeared on the territory of the American continent a maximum of 30,000 years ago, most likely, a revolution in science would have taken place if our data had been accepted. But that didn't happen. The scientific community ignored them or denied them. In the end, they were simply forgotten about. So there was no revolution. It turned out that it is more difficult to make a revolution in science than in politics. Academics prefer evolution to revolution, and not as a form of knowledge, but as a very specific scientific theory. So no one rewrote textbooks on archaeology and anthropology. For some reason, they do not want to rewrite their own works, even if there is something forcing them to change their mind. Virginia Steen McIntyre was deprived of a teaching position at a university in the United States of America. Her career as a geologist was put to an end, and only because she dared to publish data that contradicted Darwin's theory of evolution. Virginia Steen McIntyre suffered because, with scientific data in her hands, she defended a simple and seemingly quite unconscionable idea. The Incas, Mayans, Aztecs had predecessors. The history of mankind is quite vague and vague. Many civilizations that were before us are simply lost. The threads connecting us are lost. Information and knowledge are lost. In modern Peru, cars still drive on roads that were paved by unknown ancient builders. The masonry has long been hidden under the asphalt. Who built these roads, if the Inca civilization used the wheel only as a millstone? who could cut huge chunks out of super hard granite and put together walls of puzzling geometry that have stood for millennia, who connected them without any solution, so that it is impossible to push even a blade of grass into the gap. In order to work with such a stone, you need tools that are close to diamond in hardness. The Incas didn't have, let's say, any beer at all. No chronicler notes that the Incas were engaged in sawing at all. There was no such thing. All that was found of the tools, this is the most similar to our moonstone. The Inca civilization did not have its own written language either. In Peru, the so-called nodular letter was dispensed with. A pile, which most of all resembles, in fact, the cards with which computers were programmed not so long ago. Only on those maps holes were punched, and the Indians knitted knots on strings, which were then carefully collected into bundles. Already strange, makes you wonder where such a technological approach comes from. But that's not the point now. If the Incas didn't know the letter, then how to explain this? The capital of Bolivia, La Paz, the Gold Museum. Here, in a separate room, there is this bowl. Why is there so much attention paid to this stone artifact in a museum whose exposition is dedicated to precious metal? The fact is that around the perimeter of the ancient bowl there is an inscription, in a language unknown to the inhabitants of Latin America. This is the Sumerian alphabet. How did the cup of the ancient Sumerians, who lived in the interfluve of the Tigris and Euphrates, end up in Bolivia? Or was it made not by the Sumerians, but by the Incas? But then where did they learn to write in Sumerian? And why they forgot this skill later? There are legends that say that the Incas, for example, had a written language at one time, and then a ban came from above, and all writing was destroyed. The knowledge of the gods of the ancients was destroyed, that is, the knowledge of a certain ancient civilization, whose representatives people called gods. Who were they? Admittedly, it is the writings of the ancient Sumerians that give a clear answer to this question. And Zachariah Sitchin, an American scientist born in Russia, found it. He finds part of the tablets which, for example, describe the flight from the planet Nibiru, of a certain civilization that visited the Earth. Lake Titicaca. The Uros Indians have been living here for many centuries. Nature mixes reeds with bottom mud and creates floating islands. The Indians strengthen these pieces of land. For them, it is both a house and a vehicle. The Uros consider themselves direct descendants of the alien gods. They are sure that God Varacocha has taught them everything they know. My mom and my grandmothers told me about him. We call him Pachamama Varacocha. It was he who told the Mura Indians how to build houses, how to fish, but most importantly, how to make ships out of reeds that can withstand even oceanic storms. The expeditions of Thor Heyerdahl have clearly proved this. Why do Indians who live high in the mountains need such technologies? And how to explain the fact that there are sea fish in Lake Titicaca and on the shallows. You can find shellfish inhabitants of the salty waters of the seas and oceans. Where did they come from in a freshwater mountain lake? There used to be dry land here, there was nothing. Then Varacocha appeared to help us, and we began to believe in him. And then it started raining, flooding began, and it was like an earthquake on the lake. That's what my grandmother told me. At the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, more than 27 million square kilometers of land around the world have gone under the water. It was a global cataclysm. I think we don't have a full understanding of the consequences of this event. I think it is quite likely that as a result of this global cataclysm, we have lost an entire civilization. Perhaps Viracocha, teaching his wards, prepared them for this global cataclysm, which left its mark on the legends and myths of all the peoples of the earth without exception. That's why Viracocha wanted to save people, to help them. He came out of the lake and walked around the neighborhood. Yes, there is a belief that he appeared from the lake. It's a figurine. Some recognize her as a diver. This exhibit is unusual. We don't have a version of his appearance. An ancient diver and the god Viracocha, who appeared from the lake. The connection is too obvious to dismiss. Legends have preserved some information about what the alien gods looked like. For example, the same Viracocha is always described in the same way: a bearded white man. He was a white man with a beard, always dressed like a big punch. The Aymara Indians, who live high in the Peruvian Andes, and the Yura Indians from Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, speak about him in a similar way. Is it any wonder that when the conquistadors landed on the lands of the Incas, they were greeted here as dear guests? When the Spaniards first arrived in the Indian Americas, both in Mexico and in Peru, they were told that they looked like people who had lived there long before their arrival, thousands of years before, and described them as people who had white skin and the beard. They were masters in high technology. They brought civilization to South America. In order to lift our filming equipment high into the mountains to the ancient Inca cities, we had to hire porters, local Indians. And it was looking at them that we asked the obvious question: why did their ancestors need to make doorways and arches of such height in their homes and temples? Especially in the highlands, where it is very cold in winter and icy winds blow. The most simple explanation of this weird one: high-rise true builders of these buildings. Moreover, on the other side of the earth, in Mesopotamia, the local epic also tells about beings of unusually tall stature, who brought knowledge to people. This is how Sumerian clay tablets describe the Anunnaki who came to Earth from the planet Nibiru. One of the most impressive collections of Sumerian tablets with texts is kept here in Germany, at the Friedrich Schiller University of Jena. For us, this people plays such an important role because, firstly, it was on their territory that the first cities appeared, and secondly, for the reason that it was the Sumerians who invented writing. How did it happen that semi-savage tribes suddenly, for no reason at all, found writing, built stone houses, and created a state? And before that, there was not a single evidence of the lifestyle of their predecessors, not a single material proof of evolution. Just an instantaneous leap from a campfire in a cave to palaces and temples. Something happened to our brain during this period that absolutely changed us. And it's not in the external changes. The main thing is that we have suddenly become smart. Some echoes of very high knowledge have reached us. Absolutely unthinkable, exorbitant, where the Sumerians' highly accurate tables are found according to the movement of celestial bodies. It is indisputable that the Sumerians possessed amazing knowledge in the field of astronomy. But what about the fact that they claimed to have received them from extraterrestrial life forms? That the knowledge of language and writing was obtained by them from the sky? Official science suggests the only way is to treat this as fiction. But on what basis? Why are those clay tablets of the ancient Sumerians, where everyday details of their lives are described, revered by scientists as an accurate and reliable biography, while those that tell about the arrival of Anunnaki aliens on Earth automatically fall into the category of Sumerian myths and legends? only for the reason that it can't be, because it can never be. How could our ancestors have done such a thing? It speaks of 600 Anunnaki who served as observers in the orbit of the Earth. And the first 50 who landed, then their number increased there. Where did they come from on Earth? And is there any other way to prove the fact of their existence? You can. The confirmation is kept here, in the Berlin Museum of the Near East. Its authenticity is beyond doubt. This is one of the so-called Akkadian seals. Doctor of Archaeology Joachim Marcin, a leading German specialist in the study of the ancient history of Mesopotamia, and curator of the museum, agreed to personally show it to us. It's a rock, and stones in Mesopotamia are very rare and almost never met. In other words, it is an imported product. This seal was made in Mesopotamia, but the material was brought there, and it was not cheap. It's expensive stuff. A characteristic form, an age that corresponds to the time of the existence of the Sumerian Akkadian kingdom. Figures clearly appear on a small black cylinder. Dr. Marcin says that these are gods. They have characteristic crowns on their heads, but there is a man among them. If you make a print and a cast, then everything will become even more understandable and visual, and most importantly, the feature that makes this print unique will be more noticeable. There is a space between these figures that is filled with a star pattern. We see many small dots around this star. This picture is interpreted by some as a representation of the sun with planets around it. But the special thing about this statement is that there are more planets displayed around the sun, if it is the sun, than there are in our solar system. If I count all the points that are there, then I get 11. But why 11, if it is well known that the solar system consists of 8 planets? Perhaps Pluto is counted among them, which has recently lost the status of a planet despite the protests of many astronomers. But then there will still be 9 of them. What else? Sedna, which modern astronomers discovered only in the 2005 year. It is even larger than Pluto, but it turned out to be difficult to detect it because of its orbit, which is very strange for other planets of the solar system. And still, 1/11th planet is missing. Where is she? The answer can be found again in Sumerian texts. The planet Nibiru, from which the Anunnaki arrived, was located within the boundaries of the solar system. Moreover, its location is determined very accurately, between Mars and Jupiter, in the asteroid belt. Scientists are sure that some of the fragments that are circling here today may well turn out to be parts of a once single large planet. What was the cause of her death? When did this happen? Perhaps just such a global catastrophe, and the Anunnaki were forced to seek refuge on Earth. This has often been used to create a theory that is based on the fact that life on Earth, civilization did not arise by themselves, but were created by alien forces, beings from another planet of our solar system. But why, in this case, there is almost no evidence that they appeared on Earth? However, is it really so? Maybe there's enough evidence. And they meet at different ends of the Earth. It's just that official science prefers not to notice them. Great Britain, Wiltshire County. Stonehenge, an ancient megalithic monument which consists of sarsen stones with a height of almost 5 meters. The age of this world-famous structure is estimated at 4,800 years. According to the official version, this is the sanctuary of the Druids, the priests of the ancient Celts. However, Gerald Stanley Hawkins, a professor of astronomy at Boston University, and his colleague John White, after years of research and calculations, came to the conclusion that Stonehenge is an ancient observatory. It is quite obvious that he was connected with astronomy. The people who did this were experts in astronomy. They understood the principles of the movement of stars and other celestial bodies. The famous megaliths really stand in such a way that on the day of the summer solstice, you can see how the sun rises exactly over the so-called heel stone of Stonehenge. But archaeological excavations conducted by scientists from the University of Sheffield have established that Stonehenge is not only a circle of huge gray stones known to everyone. Several more concentric rings formed of stones and ditches were hidden underground. Additional calculations carried out in 1998 prove that they form an accurate model of the solar system in cross-section. On a scale, the distances between the concentric circles of Stonehenge completely coincide with the distances between the planets that revolve around our luminary. In the center of the Sun, and then in order Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. However, the ancient model indicates that there were 11 planets at the time when Stonehenge was conceived and created, just like on the Akkadian seal. What was the true purpose of this ancient monument? Perhaps it was a place of power, perhaps a place of energy recovery, but most likely, a place designed to store some important information for centuries. The Nazca Desert. Local residents have been caring for this grave for many years. The woman who rests here is honored and respected. Maria Reich, a German mathematician and geographer, devoted 30 years of her life to studying the riddle of Plato. But mainstream science today is treating her studies skeptical. Why? She doubted that the colossal drawings discovered in the Nazca Desert by an accidental pilot are pointers to water sources, as representatives of orthodox science are trying to convince us. But this version really does not stand up to criticism. Why do we need pointers that are not visible to anyone except birds? The only way to study them and really evaluate them with air. There is no other method. In addition, many drawings are made in places that are almost impassable. And then the question arises, why did you do it? Why did you do it? The drawings, the lines of which are banally dug into the soil of the Nazca Desert, occupy an area of 500 square kilometers. And it is really possible to see them only from the air, which we did, having risen above the plateau in a light plane. Monkey, spider, hummingbirds. The size of the figures is amazing. Hummingbirds are 50 meters long, other figures are even more. Just a strange miracle. Naturally, in my opinion, this is not a cosmodrome at all because, well, it's just loose sand and pebbles. Not a single device will sit down normally. Maria Ray drawings of the Nazca Desert are signs for representatives of an extraterrestrial civilization who, quite possibly, have already visited the Earth. Official science treats the problem of contacts with other civilizations in two ways. On the one hand, no one seems to doubt that we are not alone in the universe. But on the other, they prove to us with foam at the mouth that there have never been aliens on Earth, and ancient people have never communicated with them. However, it is completely unclear on what this statement is based. Then a few years ago, I saw in a bookstore an academic edition of Peru called The Archaeology of Peru. And what do you think? In this edition, there is not a word at all about the Nazca Desert. In order not to get into this problem, they just didn't mention it, and that's it. There are no Nazca drawings, there is no problem. But if the drawings in the Nazca Desert is not a message into space, for what other purpose could this be done tremendous work? To whom the priests of the Mochico tribe, buried here on the Nazca Plateau, wanted to send a signal. One of the versions, expressed by the St. Petersburg researcher Konstantin Kazanowicz, is connected with these shards, which archaeologists find in abundance in local graves and along man-made grooves in the ground, which form drawings of the Nazca Desert. If you try to connect the fragments into a whole, you will get a small vase with a convex bottom. That is inconvenient for household use, because you can't put them on the table or on the stove. So they could only be placed in sandy soil. They had to be pressed a little bit, and they would enter this soil and sit tight. Here. But the question is, for what? Why were thousands of vessels with a convex bottom shape needed? What was brought here in them? Water. Or, for example, something combustible. Butter or local vodka chichi. But for what purpose? Konstantin Kazanowicz is sure that everything is directly tied to the unique climate of the plateau. It's dry and hot here. A constant sultry haze trembles above the ground, creating ideal conditions for the so-called upper mirages. My assumption, my hypothesis, is that the ancient Inniskanians knew the secret of the upper mirages, or did someone teach it? This phenomenon is known to modern scholars. The last recorded case on the territory of Russia occurred in St. Petersburg in the hot summer of 1907 year. In Tallinn, you can sometimes see Helsinki at night in the sky. City lights are also observed over the steppes and deserts. Lights. Every time they talk about the upper mirages, the witnesses mention the lights. And what if the priests of the Machiko tribe placed vessels, firm which only shards remain today, along the Nazca geoglyphs, and lit a fire in them? Then an artificially created upper mirage appeared in the sky. A huge glowing sign is visible not only on the vast expanse of the Earth's surface, but also from outer space. These garages, the images that emerged as a result of mirages, they apparently had a completely different scale taras. Secondly, they were visible to a large number of surrounding residents. In each of these pictograms, some information was encrypted. Another fantasy. But at one time, the brilliant Konstantin Tsiolkovsky proposed to establish contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Exactly like this, with the help of huge, glowing geometric signs applied to the Earth. The mask, in fact, is such a big enough mystery, and much deeper than they write about it. And it proves in the most obvious way that there are many things in the depths of our history that we don't know anything about. The history of mankind is quite vague, and our modern civilization is not the pinnacle of human evolution. Was more developed. We are just the next civilization after them. Great Britain, London, Cromwell Road, Natural History Museum. Until very recently, it was believed that man, the first and only intelligent being on Earth, developed quite linearly with each stage, gradually becoming smarter, moving further away from his ancestor, the monkey. The version was slim, and suddenly it failed. It turned out that the Neanderthals, from whom, according to the official version, we were descended, cannot be considered our ancestors. The difference in genes is too great. From whom, then, have we descended? Indeed, there is no intermediate link between a monkey and a reasonable person yet. Perhaps it does not exist at all, and we will not find it, since it never existed. There is a version that many consider fantastic. It says that representatives of extraterrestrial intelligence took primitive ancient inhabitants of the planet Earth and performed genetic manipulations, as a result of which a reasonable person appeared. An indirect confirmation of this version can be the result of a study that was conducted in the 2010 year. Mark Kimmel, a professor of statistics from Rice University in Texas, and his colleagues from the Institute of Informatics of the Silesian University University of Technology. By statistical DNA analysis, all people living on planet Earth now have a common ancestor. Bone fragments have been found in Africa. They took a DNA sample from them to recreate the whole human genome and compared it with the gene of modern man.
И сравнили его с геном современного человека.
The results stunned scientists. Professor Shagiharu Tagachi, one of the most respected scientists in the field of human genome research. We went to him in Japan to find out how it could happen that our common foremother had 46 chromosomes, like modern humans, while her officially approved ancestors, the great apes, have 48 of them. How could these two chromosomes have disappeared in the course of evolution? And where did Homo sapiens get 200 genes that no other living creature on Earth has? Basically, humans and other living beings have the same genes, just their combinations are different. But there are a relatively small number of genes that are present only in humans and which are not present in animals. For example, those genes that are responsible for the frontal lobes of the brain. These are the genes that are responsible for speech, the genes that determine the ability to walk on two legs. What else are the frontal lobes responsible for? For planning that allows us to satisfy our desire, to implement our plans. How was the genotype of Homo sapiens formed? Scientists believe that the genes of all living beings change due to random mutations. Usually, the genes of the parents are passed on to the offspring without changes, but sometimes changes and mutations occur under the influence of any factors. Mutations occur instantly, but you need to take into account that thanks to an instant mutation, a monkey will not be able to speak and become a man. In other words, mutations must overlap, repeat over and over again, so that a creature with speech can arise. Therefore, such changes take a very long period. It is very difficult for a monkey to become a man. We can train and train primates for as long as we want, but they will not become human from this. The influence that was exerted on our ancestors was much deeper. And only our genes know, as a result of whose intervention, a pair of chromosomes disappeared and 200 genes were added. Why do we have hair growing while most animals on Earth are covered with fur? And when did a reasonable person actually appear on Earth? Darwin's theory of evolution says that the first humans appeared on the American continent 30,000 years ago. Wild dinosaurs on the entire planet died out more than 65 million years ago, long before the first man appeared on Earth. How, in this case, to explain the appearance of some striking images on the so-called Ichi stones? Dr. Cabrera's collection of stones has probably more than 1,000 stones, depicting scenes of interaction between a dinosaur and a human. So the official scientific version is wrong. So humans and dinosaurs lived on Earth at the same time. And it was not thousands, but millions of years ago. Peru. The city of Ica. The city is located 300 kilometers south of the capital of Peru, Lima. It was here, to the museum of Dr. Cabrera, that we went to see these stones with our own eyes. But it turned out that the museum was closed. Now, they told us, Ichi stones can only be found at black diggers and recommended contacting this person here. Luis Alfredo y Chuvacaro, which translates to black digger. For many years, despite constant conflicts with the authorities, he finds and sells Ichi stones. I am 44 years old, and all this time I have been working, digging, selling. Luis Alfredo spends a lot of time away from home, especially after heavy rains and mudslides. Then the rock-hard earth becomes softer, and there is hope to find ancient stones. He sells them to foreigners for a lot of money. Ichi stones are extremely popular in the West. Stones are found in places where the ground is very hard, and it is difficult to get them. It is necessary to have tools, such as a crowbar. In addition, stones are found in the desert, in the graves of priests, ancient Indians. And if they were put there, it means that they were already considered something valuable and important back then. And first of all, because of the engravings that adorn them. On the rocks that we saw, dinosaurs actually coexist with people, as Andrei Zhukov told us back in Moscow. On some stones, they are depicted as riding animals. They are conventionally marked with blankets. That is, people ride dinosaurs. The technique of applying these drawings to granite, which is almost at the very top of the moss hardness scale, remains a mystery to experts until now. The ancient Peruvians did not have, let alone steel, even iron tools, only copper and bronze. In principle, it is impossible to apply such a drawing, in such a technique, with the help of copper and bronze tools. The metal is too soft. Thousands of stones found in various places, including ancient tombs. And all of them are recognized by official science as fakes. But who can do such a massive hoax, and why carry it out? With this simple question, we turn to a person who has been studying Ichi stones for many years. Lima is the capital of Peru, the main headquarters of the Air Force. Oddly enough, it is here that one of the most authoritative collections of Ichi stones is collected. Herman Rivers, an officer of the General Staff of the Peruvian Air Force, has been dealing with Ichi stones for many years, and for some reason does not believe that they are a new model. The arguments he gives are simple. Any forgery should bring specific benefits to specific people, and nothing like in the case with the stones of Ica no. The work in creating drawings on stones has been invested colossally, and the return for those who sell them today is a penny. Officer Rivers has a professional interest in stones and key. His collection of stones says that lived here in ancient times, people had their own military aircraft. Here we see a man flying on a bird who has caught another man, and these two with spears are trying, maybe, to make him let him go. This image is repeated many times. It is clear that the ancestors of modern Indians flights mythologized, and therefore their drawings are not strict lines of the aircraft, and a picture of a giant magical birds. But the essence of this, according to Officer Rivers, does not change. People in ancient times were able to take to the air, and therefore, we are not the first civilization on Earth that has learned to use flying machines. The stones of Air Force Officer Herman Rivers can be viewed. It is not easy for representatives of official science to get to the military personnel. We have not been able to get into the museum of Dr. Cabrera, which has been closed for the second year. The locals explained to us, the lock on the door of the museum was hung by a court decision. The official version is that the heirs did not divide the property of the late doctor. Unofficial claims that they were strongly recommended to close the museum. And such, let's say, filtering of our knowledge with you happens in one way or another all the time. Ecuador, Azua Province, Queco City, Museum of Aboriginal Culture. The local Museum of Aboriginal Culture exhibits strange ceramic figurines discovered in the Amazon jungle many years ago. Scientists date them to the period from the 500th year before the birth of Christ to the 500th year of our era. Authenticity has been proven by modern research methods. Visitors are delighted at the sight of these figures, which are called astronauts because of their appearance. It's like they're in a big spacesuit, very similar to modern astronauts flying into outer space. These figurines were most likely made for religious ceremonies. Allegedly, the Incas represented the gods not as some fantastic creatures like the chimeras of Notre Dame Cathedral, but as people in spacesuits. But isn't it logical to assume that the ancient sculptors simply saw representatives of a developed civilization in front of them, who, having arrived on Earth, at first did not risk walking on an undeveloped planet in defenseless suits? By the way, images of people in spacesuits, sculptural or painted, are found not only on the American continent, but also on the other side of the Earth, in Karelia, beyond the Arctic Circle, in Siberia, in Japan. Many similar sculptures have been found in Japan. This is a sculpture of the Yeoman period, one of the oldest peoples of Japan. The figures are depicted in baggy costumes resembling astronauts or aliens from outer space. The official explanation says that it was the equipment of the riders. We don't know that. After all, no one really knows how Japanese horsemen dressed in ancient times. So why is this version considered reliable, and the other one, the one that suggests that both in Japan and on the other side of the ocean, in Ecuador, people saw creatures in protective suits recognized as heretical inventions? The gods gave people agriculture, the gods gave people metallurgy, taught them to manage. In general, they were instructed to live with families. In other words, the gods gave us the whole civilization. Gods. Or are they aliens after all? What interested them on Earth in the first place? The answers are again found in the Sumerian epic. However, it becomes more and more difficult to look for them every year. Recently, Sumerian texts can only be studied in major museums of reputable powers, for example, in the British Museum, or here in the Schiller Museum in Germany. Germany, Jena, Friedrich Schiller University. Moreover, 90% of the available plates are legal and economic texts. Those that interested us, scientists call them literary sources, even in the richest collection, the keeper of which is Manfred Krebernik, very few. You see the ancient Babylonian list of gods. The names of the gods are arranged according to the pantheon, the entire divine family down to the gods of the underworld. This is one of our few archaeological specimens. And gradually there are fewer of them. Not so long ago, during the turbulent events in the Middle East, a collection of Sumerian tablets disappeared from the Baghdad Museum, which just told about the Anunnaki. In addition, unknown persons robbed a museum in Cairo, where a similar collection was stored. The scandal was noisy, but for some reason, no one asked a completely obvious question. If they really were simple robbers, then why were they interested not in gold or silver, but in pieces of clay with incomprehensible writings? After all, only experts could understand the true value of what was stolen. Be that as it may, as a result, you and I have lost part of our past. Or we have once again been quite consciously deprived of the opportunity to find out what it really was. We cannot fully trace the origin of the Sumerian religion because the written sources that we have are insufficient. The surviving texts of the ancient Sumerians tell us that the Anunnaki were attracted to the earth by what modern earthly states are also interested in. That is why wars are still being waged today. Minerals. Each god in the pantheon of Sumerian celestials was responsible for his own work. But the supreme Anunnaki, the chief ruler of the gods, was a miner. The main number of deities had certain symbols or emblems. For example, the emblem of the supreme god of Babylon was a shovel. USA, Oklahoma, the village of Hiviner. Here, in the village of Hiviner, located in the state of Oklahoma, we came to see with our own eyes one abandoned mine. The former sheriff, and now a farmer, Harlan Vinson, agreed to show it to us. Another pensioner, William McCormick, who was also going to go with us, took with him a copy of his grandfather Elman Mattis' letter, which he carefully kept. An old miner dictated it to his grandson shortly before his death. In 1928, I, Atlas Elman Mathis, worked in a coal mine.
Работал в угольной шахте.
The shaft of the mine went deep down, and we were lowered by elevator. In the evening, we drilled holes in the coal seam and planted explosives in them.
И заложили в них взрывчатку.
The morning after the explosion, I found several concrete blocks in the mine. They were so smoothly polished from all sides that you could look in them like in a mirror. About 90, 100 meters down the air shaft, another miner came across a whole wall, complex of the same blocks. We were immediately ordered to go upstairs. In addition, the management strictly forbade us to talk about what we saw. And then, the still coal-rich mine was completely closed. It was literally leveled to the ground. The trunk was filled with spent rock, and all entrances were carefully walled up. It is still owned by the University of Oklahoma. They really found something strange there. That's one of the reasons why they shut it down. So what is being hidden from us with such care? And why do representatives of official science need this? They don't believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in reasonable arguments. They just think they should shut us up. One way or another, they attack reputation. They do not give access to the media. This is a fairly common situation. In most countries of the world, supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution are monopolists in the education system, with the support of the state.
Монополистами в системе образования при поддержке государства.
In most countries of the world, it is not allowed to present any other points of view.
Какие-либо другие точки зрения.
And I think this is very bad for countries that stand for freedom of thought, freedom of speech.
Свободу слова.
USA, California. The National Center for Science Education, established here in California, the National Center for Science Education, carefully monitors school and university natural history teaching programs. A person who expounds alternative ideas of the creation of the world in the classroom is of great concern. This is not science. If you present an unscientific approach as scientific to students in the classroom, you limit a person's ability not only to link their worldview with the theory of evolution, but also to understand how science works. This must be combated and fight. At the first suspicion of any liberties, the trustees of private educational institutions begin to be officially threatened with the fact that they will lose support from the budget. In public schools and universities, teaching of only one variant of the origin of humanity is allowed at all: Darwin's theory of evolution. There are 50 states in the United States that have the right to create laws on evolution. And, for example, last year in 7 different states, we prepared 9 bills on teaching the theory of evolution as the main interpretation of the emergence of civilization. One of them is about to become law. But only 90 years ago, in 1905, there was a famous monkey trial in Tennessee. John Scope's teacher was tried for daring to teach Darwin's theory at school. But can scientific truth be established by law? Why are they withholding information from us that, it would seem, cannot harm anyone? I have no idea who is behind this process.
Кто стоит за этим процессом?
But it is quite obvious that we are not being told the whole truth about our past and present.
О нашем прошлом и настоящем.
The materials that archaeologists find in each field season, even if, well, I just came across what people told me there, go into boxes simply under numbers, without being described, without being studied, somewhere about half of the finds. Amazing attitude. After all, in other fields of science, for example, in physics, everything is different. The newly made discoveries, which completely changed the picture of the world, in no way detract from the previous achievements of scientists. It is clear to everyone that the former, sometimes erroneous position, only a stage in the development of science. Why do historians and archaeologists behave so strangely? If global science is sure that contact with an extraterrestrial civilization is quite possible, why does a single science of archaeology categorically declare everything connected with the possibility possibility of such contact in ancient times to be fiction. Ecuador, Azuay Province, Cuenco City. Museums in Latin America have a huge number of strange elongated skulls. Ardent ufologists are trying to prove that these are alien skulls. In fact, of course, this is not the case. The skulls belong to humans. This skull has two rare main characteristics: dental nails as decoration and elongation of the head, called dolichocephaly. This elongation was achieved with the help of planks that were attached from the sides in order for the skull to develop upwards. And yet, before retiring from them, as from the evidence of possible contact with an alien civilization in the deep past, it's worth asking a very simple question. If people voluntarily disfigured themselves, agreeing to endure years of pain in order to change the shape of the skull, who were they trying to be like at the same time? We now have round skulls. The gods were different. They were very tall, but with elongated skulls. By the way, this is another amazing fact that binds together different peoples and different cultures of the earth. We shot these skulls not in Latin America, but in the Krasnodar territory, where they were found. In addition, among the Sumerians, the elongated shape of the skull was a sign of belonging to aristocratic surnames. Descendants of representatives of the caste of priests, officials, and military leaders could boast of them. That is, those whose ancestors at one time closely communicated with the gods. Or rather, with those whom our ancient ancestors worshipped as gods at different ends of the earth. The question is, have there been global contacts between different cultures? Or events developed independently, whether there was an influence from space, and independently on each of the zones of the Earth? And this question also remains open today. We came here to the British Museum to see another unique skull. This time it's crystal. The one on display here was found in 1927 year in Central America, in the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula. The caretaker, who led us through the corridors and halls of the museum, said that the skull was discovered by the expedition of the famous English archaeologist, Albert Mitchell Hedges, during archaeological excavations in the ancient Mayan city. It is made of a huge, perfectly processed rock crystal and impresses with the quality of processing. To this it is worth adding a few more important facts. Crystals of this size and quality are not found in Yucatan. And the rhinestone, the mineral is hard, and it can only be cut with a diamond. And such technologies were not possessed in ancient times. At least, that's what is commonly believed. All that we have today to prove back are legends, myths, and legends that tell about high technology in the era that preceded the Golden One. At the moment, scientists know about 13 crystal turtles found on different continents. 9 are kept in private collections. The remaining ones are represented in 3 museums, in Washington, in Paris, and here in London, in the British Museum. Official science has declared the skulls a fake. An independent examination conducted by specialists from Hewlett-Packard established their authenticity. Analysis of this skull has shown that it was made long before the appearance of the first civilizations recognized by official science on the American continent. There are many archaeological finds. Their number is growing, and it is increasingly difficult for scientists to dismiss them. We will be able to learn a lot about our past, which is probably much more interesting and fantastic than we can imagine. Experimentally recorded fact. Some people who have spent a long time with skulls begin to have amazing dreams about the past and the future. They hear the voices of people who speak an unknown experimental language. Others just get sick. At least, medics from the London Ambulance Service appear quite often in this hall of the British Museum. Who were those ancient masters who managed to do something like this? It was our specialists who proved that it is impossible to do this not only with the help of primitive tools, but also with the help of modern technology. Because in addition to polishing the perfect one, in addition to the fact that the lower jaw is endowed and moves, the quartz crystal itself, which was used to create this skull, was chosen by the consciousness of the laws of optics, the laws of refraction. Pakistan, Sindh province, the city of Mohenjo-daro. If NASA experts have come to the conclusion that the skull was created in ancient times by someone from a technical point of view, extremely advanced, it means that official science is wrong again. And modern humanity is by no means the first developed civilization of the Earth. The conclusion is logical, but technologies of such a high level could not but leave many traces of their application. Are there any? There is. The ruins of the city of Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan fully prove this. It was clearly built by beings whose level of civilization was extremely high. The inhabitants of Mohenjo-daro were at a stage of development inaccessible to anyone else, inexplicably high for that period of the history of our civilization. They had their own language and script and their own writing, which their children studied in an educational institution like a modern college. In addition, they were excellent mathematicians, extremely advanced engineers and technicians. But for us, the most interesting thing in the history of Mohenjo-daro is not his life, but his death. The city died several thousand years ago, instantly, for some unknown reason. Some of the structures of Mohenjo-daro traces of vitrification, IDS, the transformation into glass. The minerals in the bricks or stones were melted. This is one of those things that happens when sand or rocks are exposed to high temperatures. A simple fire will not give such a temperature, a volcanic eruption, but there is no ash or lava in Mohenjo-daro, as there is no volcano itself. It looks like something instantly covered from the air. And this something brought with it a temperature at which even the stones began to melt. What killed Mohenjo-daro? At the moment, we have examined about 2,000 objects on the territory of the ancient city, and have not come to an unambiguous understanding of the reason that caused the disappearance of an entire people. There is such a theme in legends and legends as the War of the Gods, that is, a kind of global conflict between the two main opposing groups that fought among themselves and fought with the use of quite serious weapons. Moreover, the war was actually waged for extermination. For the first time, this topic was touched upon by researchers on the basis of the texts of the Mahabharata, where there is a specific description of weapons. The Mahabharata, ancient Indian epic, one of the largest literary works in the world, which quite recognizably describes weapons of mass destruction, which we today habitually call nuclear. He was called Brahmastra, and it exploded with the light and temperature of millions of suns. Traces of its influence back in the 70s of the last century were discovered during excavations in Mohenjo-daro by the English scientist Davenport and his Italian colleague Vincenti. Italy, Rome, Vyasa, University, Rome 3. They sent stones and shards with traces of vitrification to Italy for examination. But for some reason, it was carried out quite formally. We did not conduct a thorough and exhaustive study.
и исчерпывающие исследования.
Do you remember that we did some tests?
Много анализов.
Why, when conducting an experiment that probably promised a worldwide sensation? More complete and advanced research methods were not used. After all, weapons of mass destruction 4,500 years ago. This is an incredible hypothesis. It must either be confirmed or refuted. But for some reason they did not do it, as other, even more obvious traces of the ancient war are in no hurry to explain. Peru, Cusco region, Sacsayhua fortress. The other end of the earth. Local kids, like all children, love to ride down the slides. But the descents that bend smoothly here are not made of plastic or metal. This is granite, which begins to melt only at a temperature of over 1,000 degrees. A volcano. Here in the Andes, they were not and are not. And earthquakes have never happened. Then what is it? Both Plato and Aristotle say in their writings that we are not the first advanced civilization that exists on this planet.
Которые существуют на этой планете.
If we try to graphically reconstruct the shape of the mountain firm which these granite waves once flowed, then we can get a certain structure, strikingly similar to step pyramids. An assumption? Yes. But here is another, already real, and not computer proof of the version that all the epics of all civilizations of our planet call the War of the Gods. This huge fragment lies away from the mountain of melted granite, but it looks as if it was torn off from the main part of a once grandiose stone building. It was as if an explosion of colossal force, the temperature of which melted the lower floors of this structure, threw some part of it aside. He threw it away and turned it over. That is why the flight of stairs carved in stone turned out to be in this position, lying, as they say, face down. Today, when the atomic age of our civilization is about to change the 8th decade, an explosion of such force will not surprise anyone. But then, tens of thousands of years ago, who on Earth was able to use weapons of such destructive power? And what will happen to our civilization if these unknown forces turn their interest back to the land they once abandoned? How much is Mama Varacocha, the man who came out of the water, said he would come back?
Сказал, что вернется.